There was a period in my life when everything felt like it was collapsing, externally and internally, relationships strained, failures stacked, and a constant sense of uncertainty became my baseline state. I don't share this for sympathy. I share it because it's in those moments where everything seems stacked against us that we're given a chance to build something unshakable within. And that something is inner strength. But here's the truth. Inner strength isn't some abstract concept. It's not motivational fluff. It's biological. It's neurological. It's trainable. Let's break this down. Inner strength is built, not inherited. This simple yet powerful truth challenges the common belief that some people are just naturally tougher or more mentally resilient than others. While genetics and early life experiences do play a role in shaping our emotional responses, they do not determine our capacity for inner strength. What truly defines that strength is the series of deliberate actions, thought patterns, and habits we cultivate over time. In neuroscience, this is closely related to the concept of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself in response. Each time you choose discipline over comfort, reflection over reaction, or focus over distraction, you're literally strengthening the neural circuits associated with self-control, emotional regulation, and long-term decision-making. This growth process mirrors physical training. Just as muscles adapt and grow stronger under stress, when appropriately challenged and given time to recover, your mental and emotional frameworks do the same. The difference lies in how we perceive discomfort. Most people see emotional discomfort or adversity as something to avoid. But those who build immense inner strength recognize it as a signal, a cue that they are entering the zone of growth. For instance, when you resist the urge to react with anger or despair in a triggering moment and instead pause, breathe, and observe your emotional state, you are rewiring your brain toward calm, controlled behavior. These small, seemingly insignificant decisions compound over time. Moreover, studies in psychology and behavioral neuroscience show that consistent exposure to voluntary stress, things like intense exercise, cold exposure, or disciplined meditation, actually increases resilience. This is known as hormesis, the process by which mild stressors strengthen the organism. In humans, hormesis doesn't just toughen the body, it trains the mind. When you push yourself through discomfort on your own terms, you expand your threshold for stress. This makes you more capable of staying grounded when real-life chaos hits. It's also important to understand that inner strength isn't about always being stoic or emotionless. That's a misconception. Emotional suppression is very different from emotional regulation. People who appear calm in storms aren't void of emotion. They've trained themselves to process feelings without letting those feelings control their behavior. That's real strength, to feel deeply yet act with intention. This skill can be cultivated in daily life. When you keep promises to yourself, whether that's waking up on time, journaling when you don't feel like it, or not reaching for your phone when boredom strikes, you are building self-trust. Self-trust is foundational to inner strength. You begin to believe on a biological level that you are the kind of person who can handle challenge, discomfort, and uncertainty. Your nervous system gradually starts responding with less panic and more poise. Building inner strength also requires a shift in identity. You don't just act strong. You begin to see yourself as someone who handles difficulty with clarity and composure. Identity-based habits reinforce the neural loops that govern resilience. Each time you act in alignment with this emerging identity, you're carving out a deeper, more stable version of strength that no external force can easily shake. Adversity activates both emotion and potential growth. This dual effect is one of the most misunderstood yet powerful aspects of human experience. When we encounter adversity, whether in the form of loss, failure, rejection, or stress, the initial reaction is almost always emotional. This is because the limbic system, particularly the amygdala, becomes highly active during times of perceived threat. It alerts the body to respond quickly, often through fear, anxiety, or anger. These responses are deeply wired into us for survival. But while emotion is the first signal, it is not the final destination. Within that emotional activation lies an opportunity. the chance to grow, adapt, and develop a more resilient internal framework. The very presence of discomfort means that your brain is being pushed outside its baseline state. In neuroscience, this is often when the most significant rewiring can occur. The stress responsor system, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal HPA axis, releases hormones like cortisol to heighten awareness and prime the body for action. But if we pause and consciously choose how to respond rather than react impulsively, we are using our adversity not just as a trigger, but as a training ground. The adversity itself becomes the pressure that shapes a more adaptive nervous system. In this way, challenge becomes a tool for sculpting internal strength. Psychologically, the process is mirrored in cognitive frameworks such as post-traumatic growth. Unlike post-traumatic stress, which leaves individuals overwhelmed by trauma, post-traumatic growth refers to the transformation that can occur after adversity is properly processed and integrated. People who have experienced significant setbacks and consciously work through them often report a deeper sense of purpose, increased emotional awareness, and improved relationships. This growth isn't automatic. It requires effort, reflection, and a certain willingness to sit with discomfort. But the capacity for growth is always embedded in the experience of suffering. From a behavioral perspective, adversity also presents a mirror. It reflects back to us our coping strategies, our beliefs, our thresholds for pain and discomfort. When we encounter hardship, we see clearly where our emotional edges are. That clarity, while uncomfortable, provides precise feedback. If we avoid adversity, we never see those limits. But if we lean in, observe our patterns, and make micro adjustments, we begin to expand those limits from the inside out. Over time, we become more capable of handling higher levels of stress without collapsing or withdrawing. Even socially and neurologically, adversity strengthens bonds and builds empathy. Shared struggles create shared meaning. In times of collective hardship, such as grief, illness, or crisis, people often come together in ways that transcend individual concerns. This collective adversity can trigger the release of oxytocin, the bonding hormone, which reinforces connection and safety. So even though hardship may seem isolating at first, it often becomes the foundation for deeper relationships and stronger communities. Ultimately, adversity is not simply a test of endurance. It is a biological and psychological catalyst. The emotion it stirs is real and intense, but it is also a doorway. Through that doorway lies the potential to rewire, adapt, and elevate every internal system that makes us human. The brain's limbic system triggers stress. Awareness is the first control point. When a person encounters a threat, whether physical, emotional, or even perceived, the limbic system instantly activates. This region, particularly the amygdala, acts as an internal alarm bell, signaling the body to prepare for danger. It operates faster than conscious thought, which is why we often feel a spike of fear, anxiety, or anger before we even understand what's happening. The amygdala communicates with the hypothalamus to launch the body's stress response, flooding the system with adrenaline and cortisol. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, and attention narrows. This response is automatic and deeply evolutionary. It exists to protect us. But in modern life, the threats we face are rarely physical. They are more likely to be social, psychological, or emotional. A harsh comment, a missed opportunity, a looming deadline. Yet the brain often responds to these with the same fight or flight intensity as it would to an actual predator. This is where the issue arises. When the limbic system dominates, it overrides the slower, rational parts of the brain, especially the prefrontal cortex, which governs logic, self-regulation, and decision-making. In a limbic-driven state, a person becomes reactive rather than reflective. They might say things they regret, withdraw impulsively, or spiral into anxiety, not because they lack intelligence or strength, but because their brain is temporarily hijacked. This is why awareness is the first true point of control. The moment one becomes aware that the stress response has been triggered, the prefrontal cortex begins to come back online. Awareness is like a signal flare. It illuminates the inner terrain and allows us to witness the emotional storm rather than be swept away by it. Neuroscience shows that even simply labeling emotions, saying internally, I feel anxious, or this is anger, can reduce activity in the amygdala and activate the prefrontal cortex. This shift gives a person just enough space to pause, breathe, and choose a more constructive response. That initial pause is everything. It's not about denying the stress or pushing it away. It's about observing it without immediately reacting. This practice, often called interoceptive awareness, involves tuning into bodily signals, racing heart, shallow breath, clenched muscles, and identifying them as stress indicators rather than threats themselves. Over time, this ability creates a buffer between stimulus and response. The limbic system may still fire, but the conscious mind begins to regulate the intensity and direction of that firing. Through repeated practice, the brain becomes more efficient at managing stress. Just like physical training builds muscle memory, mental training builds neural efficiency. Techniques like mindfulness, controlled breathing, and structured reflection all serve to reinforce this process. Each time a person interrupts a reactive loop with awareness, they are strengthening the neural circuits that support emotional regulation. This doesn't eliminate the stress response, but it transforms the relationship with it. Instead of being at the mercy of unconscious reaction, the individual starts to become a conscious participant in how they engage with pressure and challenge. The prefrontal cortex enables conscious self-regulation. This part of the brain, located just behind the forehead, is one of the most advanced and evolutionarily recent structures in the human nervous system. It governs functions such as planning, focus, impulse control, and decision-making. When we talk about willpower, discipline, or inner strength, what we're often referring to is the activity and development of this region. Unlike the limbic system, which reacts based on instinct and emotion, the prefrontal cortex allows for deliberate, thoughtful responses. It helps us pause before acting, reflect on our emotions, and make choices aligned with long-term values rather than short-term impulse. In the face of stress, the prefrontal cortex and limbic system often compete for control. When fear, anxiety, or frustration arise, the amygdala tries to take over by triggering the fight or flight response. This reaction is fast and automatic, bypassing rational thought to maximize speed. But when the prefrontal cortex is active and well-trained, it can modulate that reaction. It assesses the situation, analyzes potential outcomes, and chooses behavior based on logic and self-awareness. This ability to override impulsive reactions is a critical component of emotional resilience and self-mastery. Studies in neuroscience show that the prefrontal cortex is highly trainable. Through practices such as mindfulness meditation, journaling, and even structured problem solving, its connectivity and function can improve. When a person repeatedly engages in tasks that require focus and regulation, they're reinforcing the neural circuits that make those tasks easier over time. This is similar to building strength in a muscle. The more it's used intentionally, the more efficient and capable it becomes. Self-regulation also involves inhibitory control, the ability to suppress a dominant response in favor of a more adaptive one. For example, when someone receives criticism, the immediate urge may be to react defensively or lash out, but with a well-developed prefrontal cortex, they can recognize the emotion, take a breath, and choose to respond calmly or even constructively. This doesn't mean suppressing emotion, but rather managing it with skill. The space between stimulus and response becomes wider, offering more room for intention and clarity. Sleep, nutrition, and exercise all play a role in supporting prefrontal cortex function. Lack of sleep, for instance, reduces its capacity to regulate emotions and maintain focus. Chronic stress can weaken its efficiency, making impulsive behaviors more likely. On the other hand, regular physical activity, especially aerobic exercise, has been shown to increase blood flow and promote neurogenesis in this region. A well-functioning prefrontal cortex is not just a product of mental effort, but of overall lifestyle quality. What's remarkable about the prefrontal cortex is that it not only helps us act wisely in the present moment, but it also allows us to imagine and work toward a better future. It enables foresight, moral reasoning, and abstract thinking. It is the seat of vision. The more a person engages with life from this part of the brain, the more agency they gain over their emotions, their habits, and ultimately their identity. Daily mental training like breathwork, cold exposure, and journaling strengthens resilience. These practices are not just lifestyle habits or productivity tools, they are neurobiological interventions that shape the brain's capacity to regulate stress, increase focus, and maintain emotional balance under pressure. The nervous system is highly adaptive, and by intentionally placing ourselves in controlled discomfort or reflective stillness, we train it to respond more effectively to the unpredictable stresses of daily life. Breathwork, for example, has a direct impact on the autonomic nervous system. Techniques like slow diaphragmatic breathing or box breathing activate the parasympathetic branch, signaling safety to the body and down-regulating the stress response. This trains the system to transition more fluidly from high arousal to calm, even in the face of triggering events. Cold exposure works differently, but with a similar result. Deliberately placing the body in a mildly stressful environment, like a cold shower or ice bath, activates the sympathetic nervous system, leading to an initial spike in adrenaline and heart rate. But over time, repeated exposure increases the body's tolerance for stress and builds what researchers call stress inoculation. The individual becomes less reactive, not just to the cold, but to stress in general. It teaches the brain and body that discomfort is survivable and that panic can be observed rather than obeyed. This shift doesn't just happen in the moment. It creates long-term neural adaptations that enhance resilience and composure under pressure. Journaling adds a cognitive and emotional dimension to mental training. When you write about your experiences, thoughts, or struggles, you are engaging the prefrontal cortex in the process of making meaning. This reflection helps regulate the limbic system by providing narrative and structure to what might otherwise feel like chaotic emotion. Studies show that expressive writing reduces anxiety, improves immune function, and enhances memory consolidation. It also deepens self-awareness, which is essential for making intentional changes in behavior. Through journaling, people can track patterns, identify emotional triggers, and reconnect with values that guide their decisions. What unites these practices is that they each place the individual in a position of conscious engagement with discomfort or reflection. Instead of being passive recipients of stress, people become active participants in training their stress response systems. This sense of agency is itself a powerful resilience builder. When you choose to breathe through discomfort, step into cold, or reflect honestly on paper, you reinforce the belief that you are capable of withstanding and mastering challenge. The frequency of these practices matters. Daily repetition creates consistency, and consistency creates familiarity. The brain begins to expect a certain rhythm of regulation, and the nervous system adjusts accordingly. Over time, the baseline level of emotional reactivity decreases, while the capacity for intentional focus and groundedness increases. These aren't quick fixes or dramatic overnight changes. They are slow, deliberate recalibrations of the systems that govern our internal state. Mental strength becomes less about willpower in the moment and more about the accumulated effect of repeated training and conscious self-regulation. True inner strength is calm, control, not aggressive force. This distinction is fundamental to understanding resilience and emotional mastery. Many people mistake loudness, intensity, or domination for strength. But in reality, these are often symptoms of inner instability. True strength reveals itself in quiet, measured responses, especially under stress. It's the person who remains composed when chaos erupts, who listens more than they speak, who pauses instead of reacts. Calm control is not weakness. It is power under direction. It reflects a well-regulated nervous system and a high-functioning prefrontal cortex that can override impulsive emotional responses in favor of thoughtful action. Aggression, especially when reactive, is frequently driven by fear, insecurity, or the need to assert dominance as a form of self-protection. It's the nervous system in a defensive state, flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, functioning on autopilot. While this may create the illusion of strength in the short term, it often leads to destructive outcomes, damaged relationships, poor decisions, and emotional exhaustion. Calm control, on the other hand, originates from a place of self-assurance and presence. It means you have trained yourself to sit with discomfort without being overwhelmed by it. This ability is not innate for most people. It is cultivated through practice, awareness, and discipline. Neurologically, Calm control is associated with high vagal tone, the capacity of the vagus nerve to regulate heart rate and emotional arousal. People with high vagal tone can shift more easily from sympathetic activation, fight or flight, to parasympathetic recovery, rest and digest. This flexibility is what allows someone to remain composed in the face of pressure. Practices like deep breathing, meditation, and slow, intentional movement enhance vagal tone and reinforce this internal balance. Over time, the body becomes less reactive to stress and more capable of maintaining homeostasis. Psychologically, calm control requires a shift in identity. Instead of seeing oneself as someone who must fight to be respected or heard, the individual begins to view restraint and groundedness as the real markers of maturity and influence. They recognize that reactions are often short-term solutions to long-term problems, and that responding from a regulated state creates far better outcomes. Emotional self-regulation in this context becomes a skill that not only supports personal peace, but also improves leadership, relationships, and decision-making. Culturally, calm strength is often overlooked because it doesn't demand attention. It moves quietly behind the scenes and influences through presence rather than pressure. But its effects are long-lasting and deeply impactful. People remember those who remain steady when others lost control. They trust those who don't escalate tension, but dissolve it through grounded energy and focused clarity. This kind of strength doesn't need to announce itself. It's felt through the way someone carries themselves, through their tone, through the way they hold silence without discomfort. It's the result of internal order, of a nervous system trained not just to survive stress, but to transform through it.